He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. So, do you see the timing here of what's going on? Jesus is just given this really direct warning to his disciples about a group of people that are standing right there, and he's calling them predators. He's saying that they are devouring these women and that they're putting on a show and everything else that they're doing. And then he just happens to look up. No, he clearly knew what was going on. In the temple, he lifts his eyes up, and it says that he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. And in verse 2 there, he also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. So when Jesus looks up, he's seeing the things that are happening, but he sees a widow. And I don't know how far away he was from the treasury box, but I would imagine her 2 small copper coins couldn't have made a ton of noise, right, as they were falling into that treasury. This is something that only Jesus would have known. And the coins that she gives in, just to give you a sense of the value. If you remember last week, we talked about a denarius, right? A denarius was worth a normal laborer's daily wage, okay? That was a denarius. These coins were called lepta, and they were worth about 1/100th of a denarius, okay? To give you a sense of scale of just how little this was. This was like a couple of minutes worth of work in a day. But that's what she had, right? This offering that she's giving is barely worth noticing when the rich are dropping in offerings that are far more impressionable to us. But Jesus saw her. He saw her action. He saw this step that she took. And he says in verse 3, truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. When we come across a moment in Scripture when Jesus is saying, hey, truly I tell you, that's when we need to stop and listen. Because Jesus is about to say something that can overturn the way that we were going to evaluate what we just saw. He's trying to say, hey, I'm going to bring you in to see what I see. So this is what's really happening. This poor widow has put in more than all the others. How is that possible? How could this widow have put in more than all the others? Because clearly that was not gold that she was putting in the box. You know, those were 2 small copper coins. So how could she have given him more? And he says in verse 4, all these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had to live on. Her 2 tiny coins, this lepta that was worth so little, it's not what she had left over. Okay? It's not what was in her budget for giving. It was everything that she had. When she walked out of the temple that day, she had nothing to feed herself with. She had nothing to pay her rent with. She gave God her last 2 coins. One of the commentators said it this way as I was studying this week. He said, for he, speaking of Jesus, who knows the hearts of all men, perceives that the 2 coins she has put into the offering are actually all the living she had. Her total devotion, which no one but Jesus would have realized, is the exact opposite of the Jewish leaders' religion, which is all show and no heart. She gave it all. It was the exact opposite of what Jesus had just been talking about. And Luke wants us to feel that contrast. Another commentator says this, giving all that she had demonstrated her surrender to God. It was an act of great faith. If the Lord had provided those 2 copper coins, then he could provide 2,000 or 20,000. The coins were not her salvation, God was. Let me say that again. The coins were not her salvation, God was. She didn't give that offering because she was hoping that God would bless her with something or that she could earn something. She gave it because she had nothing left to trust except for God. She was putting it in his hands. We've talked a whole lot these last few weeks about surrender. And this woman demonstrates to us what surrender really looks like. And it's convicting, right? To see this kind of devotion, to see this kind of willingness. I don't think I haven't given like this widow. I've never given my last 2 cents in that way. I've given, I've tithed, right? I supported missionaries. We do all those things. I've been generous in different seasons, but I've never been in that place where this is it. I'm giving it to the Lord. And yet she gave what she couldn't afford to give. The Pharisees were putting a lot of trust in the costume that they were wearing and the appearance that they were giving. But man, that is so hollow. The widow was the one actually trusting in God, actually putting her faith, her devotion. What do you think her prayer life was like? When you go to the effort of saying, Lord, I'm going to give this to you because I trust you to take care of me and because it's yours. She gave it. What do you think her prayer life was to say, Lord, I'm depending on you for my next meal. I'm depending on you for a place to stay. Do you think that prayer life was real and vital and that there was a relationship there? Yeah. And it wasn't there with this other group of people. So what are we supposed to do with all this now that we've read the text, we've studied what it says, and the question is, what do we do? How do we live as a result of this? And I think where we see the gospel is clearly it's in a couple ways, right? Like the one picture that we see really clearly is that this woman gave everything she had, and that was an example of what we're going to see Jesus do in a couple weeks as we continue to read here. He didn't hold anything back in giving himself for us. But I think what's important for us to remember, because it's easy to fall in the trap of, well, if I just do this thing, then this is what will happen, right? Like there was not a guarantee for this woman that if she put in her last